Good morning, everybody. It's 12:31, and it's approximately 9 a.m. It's 9:04, actually. If we look over here, we can see the clock. It's not a countdown clock. It's a count-up clock. Yeah, time is moving forward. Although there are New Year's Eve midnight night owls that know in 15 hours, approximately, we're going to hit the midnight hour. And the question is, it's a Happy New Year. Will there be any fireworks at the Boca Hotel? There certainly should be. Now, normally, the Boca Hotel fires off their fireworks somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m. And the question is, are they closing down? They usually close down the on the grounds. They close down the driving range, and they launch all this fireworks stuff straight up from the driving range. Yeah, because it's kind of like it's surrounded. The property now is surrounded by let's say multi-million-dollar condominiums. Yeah. Win the lottery and buy a condo in Boca Raton, Florida. Yeah. So as you can see, December 31. It's Tuesday, the last day of 2024. And we've elected a president and a vice president. You know, all the cabinet members serve at the pleasure of the president. But in the Constitution, it notes that the Vice President does not serve at the pleasure of the President. Therefore, they could be with adverse interests to each other, so to speak. They could be battling it out. I wouldn't recommend it, because I think Trump, being the New York tough guy that he is. I mean, he is. There's no question. You're going to build, high-rise office towers in major cities like New York City. And you got to deal with all the political actors that are needed to get the permits moving along in Manhattan. Yeah, that's like magic. But Trump's father walked them through it. These kids spent their lives walking around construction sites because Trump was not one of these armchair developers. He literally got on site early in the morning, probably to see who's showing up, because he's a kick-ass manager, and he wants to make sure everybody gets out of bed, gets attitude adjustment, be happy, and, give me a day's work for a day's pay. Yeah, it's kind of like as simple as that. I remember My parents telling me a day's work for a day's pay. It's that simple. Yeah, let's turn down that epidemic just a little bit so I don't run out of voice, in 4 minutes. Yeah. So, oh, Lordy. So here's my pictorial guide through what happened before December 31st. Mega donor to Democrats has surprise. 2-word description of Donald Trump. Well, I said 2 words, but I added more words. He's a kick-ass manager. Yes, he is. Yeah. Now, here's an important topic. Producers, give me full screen on that. Yeah, there you go. Can the insurance companies, as we know it, will it survive climate change? Can insurance, as we know it, survive climate change? Yeah. Well, it may survive, but the people paying the premiums, like in South Florida, if the insurance companies fold up and go away, you get Continental Insurance, I believe. And you pay up for that. Big premiums. They could be double last year's premiums. Yeah. It's hard to, I sat with the board of an insurance company, and I was vice chairman of the board of a bank holding company. And banks and bank holding companies all have to follow the same statutes. Now, as a bank holding company that I was vice chairman of and founding director, insurance companies love to collect premiums, but they do not like to pay claims. They do everything to not pay claims, although they do, but they're not in a big hurry, because insurance companies don't make money paying claims. They just don't. They make money collecting premiums. And then you subtract all the expenses, and then hopefully there's something left over for the shareholder, or shareholders, as we know it. Yeah, so that big wave right there is a Category 6 storm. And as we learned several days ago, a Category 6 storm is a storm that has wind in excess of 192 miles an hour, because that's the upper border of a Cat 5. So someone suggested, I even suggested it last year, let's create Category 6, just so I keep everybody on their toes. Yeah, add Cat 6, what the hell? Because, with all this climate change and this and that, you go through cycles of storms and then not so many storms. And then you have storms and then you don't have so many storms, as the years go by. Now this year, we had a couple of whoppers that went right up through the Gulf and took a right turn right into the panhandle of Florida and went right up through the panhandle right around Tallahassee, and then went straight up, into South Carolina, North Carolina, and as the storm, interfaces, that's a nice word, huh? When those storm clouds interface with the mountains, it produces a lot of rain, a lot of tornadoes, and when you're in a mountainous territory, the water, and it rains 15 inches of rain, per day, and the storm hangs over you for 2 or 3 days, that's 45 inches of rain. That's a lot of rain, considering it's covering every square foot of the mountain range. Well, the bad thing about mountain ranges is that what goes down further, and the water, then starts coming down off the mountains into the valleys, and you end up with huge rivers of water that'll likely exceed any kind of a drainage ditch arrangement, that mountain valley towns have or had. And when the winds this year went up through the center of the state of Florida, I'll show you a picture. There we go. Look at that sucker. That's a helicopter view, or a drone view, probably a drone, looking at likely a mountain valley area. See how it comes around the turn and it goes down here. Well, look at all the junk. Look at all this stuff. These are the major parts of what do you call it? Concrete trucks. Yeah. And somewhere in this mess, here's a bunch of wheels. I'll bet those cement trucks sat on those wheels in a certain way. And look at these devices. These are big backhoes, that collect. The problem when you're cleaning up an area like this is, you're not just clearing dead vegetation. You're sweeping up the infrastructure of the city itself. You don't see any pavement there, do you? No. So anyone riding around better have a 4-wheel vehicle so they don't get stuck in the mud. Look at this stuff. This is all iron caging. This is big stuff. Here's a big propane cylinder, which was sitting on this iron grate, which you can see on the top of it. It's supposed to be underneath it, and of course it's been washed down the street. So yeah, here's another one of those propane cylinders that's supposed to be on top of this iron stuff, which is supposed to be in the backyard, so to speak, of a beautiful North Carolina home. Which is gone. I hear these people are up the hill a bit, so They didn't get washed down like everything around this turn did. Yeah. Yeah, there's some buildings up on top of the hill. So it pays to be, up on top. Those are the safe properties. When you get these nice, sweet properties that come around the turns, well, when you get a storm like this, you could be washed away. It's dangerous stuff. Well, we seem to be in an increase storm cycle. And these storms run, I understand, on a 14-year cycle. Yeah, 14-year. There's several cycles. A 14-year cycle, which is, the weather activity and hurricane intensity and so forth. Then you have a 19-year cycle, which is more planetary, and a 30-year cycle, if I remember right. Yeah. Well, all those cycles, are kind of lining up, Here's a guy standing next to his Model S. Tesla that he's owned for 9 years. So he was what you would call an early adopter of the... look how beautiful that car is. That's, the designer, Franz something, what's darn it, I forget how to say his name. But he designed, and of course you got, what do you call it, Elon, kibitzing, but you had a beautiful designer. Look how beautiful that car is. That's a 9-year-old car. God, it looks like a this-year-old car. The only difference is, you see, in this, where they have this little silver doodad, that's now a camera, embedded on both sides. So you have 8 cameras all the way around. Now this car has a LiDAR, a small LiDAR detection device in the front, just above the license plate. Yeah. Elon decided to take the LiDAR out and have visual cameras all the way around. And let's design a neural network, whatever that means. It's something to do with how bits and bytes are processed, learned, whatever. Let's have a neural network that learns, everything that's coming through the video. 3 cameras in the front, right above, right in the windshield. They're right there in that upside down, that triangle. That's right, embedded with the rear view mirror. They're not attached. They're glued on somehow. But there are 3 forward-facing cameras up there on top. And then you see the driver there. And then on each side, there are 4 cameras, 2 on each side. 2 facing forward from the side of the car, embedded in that triangle I showed you, and then 2 facing, in the rear. So, they're facing outward at an angle. So 3 forward-facing cameras, different focal lengths, meaning super wide angle, and medium telephoto, I would call it. And then 4 cameras on the sides, and then 1 camera in the back, right, I believe above the license plate. There's a rear-facing camera with a wide-angle lens in it. Yeah. Anyway, so the big deal about, the problem with, Elon Musk is he's a nice gentleman, but in the world of public companies, he's got a big mouth. He should learn to keep his big mouth closed. He talks too much. Corporate lawyers, when Elon takes the microphone, the corporate lawyers start taking notes, and how to cover their fannies or how to cover the fannies of the corporation, because Tesla, Elon Musk through Tesla, makes statements that sound like promises when they're projections. And year over year, Tesla is saying, we're going to have a 50% growth. Well, 50% growth is like, holy mackerel, that's a lot of growth. He's just about been doing it every year. And you got 50% growth year after year, you've got a company that's really growing. Yeah. Well, so has its stock price, by the way. I remember talking to my son about, why don't you invest in Tesla? Just buy a couple of shares. Take $500 out of your $5,000 bonus and buy some Tesla stock, on your own account. You already got a 401 and all that stuff going for you, which is great. And the corporation making contributions. Yeah. And then, that'll grow into some nice big fat number when you're ready to retire. But anyway, when I was talking to Daniel about that, the stock was, $175 a share. Well, guess what? A year later, it's $430 a share. Wham! It like zoomed right past $300 a share, right to over $400 a share. But it's a crazy company. I've been really paying attention. Here's category 6. I mentioned it a couple of days ago. An ultra-intense Cat 6 storm will unleash winds 192 miles an hour or more, with a seawall, a storm surge exceeding 25 feet. Now, you look up. I'm looking up at my ceiling right now, and, that's 8 feet tall. 9 feet tall, maybe. Well, 3 times 9 is 27. So it's like a 3-story building. That's how high the water is. So your 1-story building is going to be totally submerged in the storm surge. So if you're, if you're on the west coast of Florida and a storm comes up in the Gulf, if you're on the south end of that storm as it crosses into Florida, assuming such a thing, you're in the sweet spot for big surge. So govern yourself accordingly. Yeah, we used to live in Tampa, and you used to scare the bejesus out of me when these things would cook up. Yeah. You see that when a storm takes that cyclonic motion, that rotating motion, and from the space station we got up there, this rotating counterclockwise rotating storm, with 100-mile-an-hour winds or higher in the middle, that's a lot of velocity, and you got all the thunderstorms and everything rotating, and the sun is beating down on that, which, you open your palm and feel the sun hit your palm of your hand. It gets hot. Well, just think of all that energy that's being absorbed into that cloud structure. Your hand is such a little infinitesimal size compared to that storm. So just think of the energy that the storm is getting from the sun, Now it's also getting a lot of energy from the warm waters, because that storm is circulating in a counterclockwise direction. In the southern hemisphere, it rotates in the opposite direction. Yeah, because of the rotation of the Earth. Anyway, so the reason why our astronauts have not gone back to the moon in 50 years, can you believe it? 50 years ago, a whole lifetime, and no more moon activity. Well, why is that? Well, your directors of NASA, didn't have enough kapuchits to convince the then president of the United States, and of course, just assuming 8-year terms, 5 times 8 is 40, 4 times, 12 is 48, 8, times 6 times 8 is 48. So that could be running 6 administrations at least. Now, Jimmy Carter had a 4-year stint instead of 8. Everyone else has had 8. Trump is about to start his 5th year of 8. He was elected, and then in 2020 he got unelected, meaning Biden got elected. And then in 2024, everyone said, you know what, that Trump guy, he wasn't that bad after all. Because everyone had a jingle in their pocket. Salaries were rising. Things were being built. There was all kinds of optimism in our society. Yeah, that builds on itself. And, Elon Musk is hell-bent for election, pardon the expression, to go to, to go to the moon and go to Mars. The closest planet to Earth, with regard to orbits around the sun, that is. And the only bad thing about that is the storms keep coming. No matter how much you pray, it seems, every year there's a surprise of where it comes. Will you get insurance? When you're going to Mars, which is the next planet, in our solar system, the bad part is the atmosphere is carbon dioxide of all chemicals. And, we don't breathe carbon dioxide very well. CO2. Yeah. CO2. So you got two double bonds connected, in that carbon atom, C for carbon, O2. So the two oxygen atoms in each molecule of CO2. And Elon Musk has a simple method of splitting off the oxygen from methane, ethane, propane, butane. Remember that methane? That's C with 4 hydrogen, I believe, atoms surrounding it. Methane. Yeah. CH4, yeah. H for hydrogen. So apparently you can split that away and combine that with the CO2 and you end up with some oxygen molecules, oxygen atoms, I should say. And that's, if they set up a plantation, if you will, of these tents that can be erected on the surface of Mars, and assuming they can survive whatever storms, are pursuant to an atmosphere with that's largely CO2. If you breathe CO2, you start coughing. Huge coughing if you're in an atmosphere of CO2. So you drop right to the ground if you try. You go out in an atmosphere of CO2, you better hold your breath and don't go any further than it. You can make a round trip back into the atmosphere of at least oxygen with a concentration of roughly 20% of the atmosphere. Yeah. Now the other 79% of our atmosphere is nitrogen, of all things. And our bodies can tolerate nitrogen going in and out of our lungs as long as it's accompanied by oxygen. Yeah. And that's our atmosphere. Nitrogen, oxygen, and then trace elements of other things, a bunch of other things that are non-poisonous to most animals that breathe with lungs, and most animals that breathe underwater with gills. Yeah. So that's why the Earth is in the background of this. Happens to be a lunar landscape with a footprint. You'd likely get the same kind of a footprint on Mars. A dusty, hard-shelled planet. The question is, does it have a hot liquid center piece, like Earth has, and every once in a while it pops out in what we commonly call a volcano. And molten lava leaks through some of the platelets because our Earth is surrounded with 6 or 7 plates. It's not one solid spherical shell. It has plates that shift and move, which we commonly call earthquakes when they shift and move. And when they get severed deep underground into the outer perimeters of the center of our planet, you have molten, which is red hot dirt. It's called lava when it comes out through, when it leaks out through a volcanic crevice or a volcanic, mountain, if you will, like Mount Fuji, when it erupts. It could have a huge eruption in which there would be like an explosion of catastrophic, my watch is buzzing. Yeah. Anyway, that's my story with that. And here's our Treasury Secretary, I guess. I guess this person would take over for Janet Yellen. Yeah. That would be the succession of that post that serves at the pleasure of the president. Secretary Scott Bessent. Bessent. Scott Bessent. Yeah. So he's a financial wizard and understands the impact of tariffs, rising prices, rising and not rising interest rate cycles. Yeah. How about rate stability? How about setting a fair rate and just sit on that rate? Obama did it, and he sat on a rate of 0. That's an exciting interest rate for, the national debt, any kind of debt. Of course, consumer debt gets marked up 300 basis points over 0. That's when interest rates were in the 3s. Because maybe the Fed rate was half a point over 0. Right now it's like 6.5 points over 0. 6.5 is getting to the point of shutting down businesses. Yeah, it's too big a rate. Yeah. Maryland and I lived through a 14%. How would you like that? Your interest rate on your mortgage is 14.25, 14.5. I remember those rates. Woo. Back in 1980. Oh crap. 1982, 3, right around in there. Yep. The mortgage rates were over 14%. I had a special deal. get this, with Southeast Bank, and they said, how about we'll give you a mortgage on whatever house you decide to buy, in the Tampa market. And it will be 60%, 60% of the current mortgage rate. Well, I figured, wow, that's really a great idea. Well, 60% of 14 is like 8. I paid 8.5%. I thought I got lucky and hit by lightning. And 8.5% mortgage. And Southeast Bank, guarantees 60% over the then current mortgage rates. If they go down, you go down. If you're no longer employed at Southeast Bank, then the rate goes to market rate. I should have argued it stays at 8, period. That's the ceiling. And it's 60% of the mortgage rates if it's lower than 8%. Yeah. That should have been the paragraph. Because the mortgage department is like Hell's Kitchen. They had very high levels of expectation on the mortgage originations. I happen to be very fortunate in that I was not, I was not your typical gray suit banker. I wore blue suits. Maybe with a little faint stripe in the material as an alternate to just a deep navy blue suit. Yeah. Gray pinstripe. I don't know. When I traveled to Miami to visit the headquarters office of Southeast to get a loan approved, I would wear my gray suit. So I would fit in with all the rest of the stiffs that walk around in the offices of Southeast Bank. I mean, oh God, it was a colony of stiffs. Yeah, it's a shame. I really love the bank because it had such resources. You want to make a $40 million loan. Just fly down to Miami, meet with Jess Lawhorn, tell them about the attributes of the loan, and of course it was to Class A, Triple A borrowers, borrowers that Southeast Bank dreamed of having for decades. And who brought them into the bank? Jimmy, unassisted by any help from Miami. Other than the technical support in approving the loan and all that stuff. But, I didn't need any, more senior bankers. I was as senior a banker as those borrowers needed. Yes, sirree, Bob. And we put together some very nice loans. They were trying to deal with Edward DeBarlo for about 30 years. Never could get in the front door. Guess who made a loan to a shopping center for Edward J. DeBarlo with 100% personal guarantee? His financial statement was like the letter S in World Book Encyclopedia. It was about that thick, and it was bound. It was hard bound with a blue cover. And I remember getting the financial statement number like 78 or something. That means 77 others of these were handed out to worthy bankers around the country, all wanting and needing institutional financing. Yeah. So I did a little, I got a loan commitment on it was a $42 million renovation loan on a shopping center in the northern part of the state of Florida. Yeah. And Edward J. DeBarlo had offices in Tampa. And I, met Edward J. DeBarlo in an establishment by the name of Malio's. And at 5 o'clock in the evening, when Edward J. DeBarlo would visit Malio's, I happened to be there, coincidentally, on purpose. Yeah. And I went to there was a guy named Malio. Malio and Chris Alvarone. Last name Alvarone with an A. They were twin brothers. Not identical twins, fraternal twins. Meaning they both had their own nucleus as their body developed inside their mother. And they were born on the same day. And Chris and Malio Alvarone. Yeah. So I was sitting there or standing, at the bar. Marilyn was probably sitting, I was standing. I'd eventually sit down. But I was standing up at the bar, leaning with my left elbow, on the edge of the bar. Facing the front door, like all good Italians do. I'm not Italian. But you always never have your back to the front door. I learned that at an early age. You always want to see what's coming in the front door. And if they come in, with rifles firing, drop down. Get on your knees quickly, as fast as you possibly can, and just pretend you got shot and lay in a puddle of nothing. Anything standing they shoot at. Anyway, I'm being a wise guy. So I went to Malio and I said, because he told me this story about Edward DeBarlo, giving him $1 million financing to build out the interiors of Malio's. That was the name of the place. Big sign out front and all that. I happened to do a loan on let's see. No, I didn't do a loan on that building. So I said to Malio, so you probably have a working relationship with Mr. DeBarlo. Oh yeah, we're good friends and all that kind of stuff. He says he comes in here all the time. And I said, well, I'm here all the time. Is there a way you could introduce me to Mr. DeBarlo? I would be so honored. I represent the 10th largest bank in the United States. At the time, Southeast Bank was somewhere between 10 and 11 billion. Remember, in $1980, which is a long time from today. 45 years ago. 45 years ago. Can you imagine? Woo! Anyway, so sure as hell. He told me, he said, Mr. D's going to be in here. He's going to come in here around 5:15. It's like clockwork. He said, well, is there any way, after you serve him his first cocktail, I don't want to rush him before he's had his first couple of sips. Serve him his first cocktail, which is some kind of brown whiskey, which makes me shiver thinking about it. I'm a vodka and soda guy. If I get really exotic, I get a twist of lime. Yeah, it could be lemon. I prefer lime. Anyway, or nothing. So sure as hell, he comes in on a Thursday evening. And Mario goes over there, serves him cocktails, says hello, gives him a nice greeting. Since he gave him $1 million loan to build out the place. And you become friends. You're all from Youngstown, Ohio. Yeah, not me, but the Malios, the Alvarones, and DeBarlo. They're Youngstown, Ohio people. Yeah. So Mr. D comes in the front door. 5'7" tall, maybe. Yeah, I'm 5'8", so I could look him straight in the eye. I'm always looking up. I get a stiff neck. Anyway, so Mr. D comes in the door. Mario serves him his first cocktail, and when he's about halfway done with it, Mario then gets Jimmy and says, "Come on, let's go. Let's go meet Mr. D." So I follow closely behind Mario as he introduces me to Mr. D, who's a fine Ohio gentleman. He is the gentleman's gentleman. You wouldn't believe he was one of the richest people in the United States. He owned more income property than anybody in the United States. He was the largest income property owner in the country. And that's why he had a financial statement that was the size of letter S in the encyclopedia, in the World Book Encyclopedia. And for your knowledge, that means the book was about 1.5 inches thick. The letter T was much smaller than the letter S in the World Book stream of encyclopedias. You got 20 books or so covering just about every letter of the alphabet from A to Z. Yeah. You had one volume at the end, which is the index for the other 22 volumes, or whatever number of volumes there were. Like X, Y, Z, those 3 letters were all bound in one book that was 1 inch thick. But the letter S was the largest, thickest. I used to read the encyclopedias when I was a kid, very slowly. But I'd look at all the pictures and I'd page through these encyclopedias. It was like, man, all the things you could learn. Get your brain working. This is when I was like 10. They had an encyclopedia, and I decided to start reading it. And I remember getting past the letter S into T, QRST, then comes U, right? I might have gotten to U. Yeah. So I met Mr. T, and we had a nice conversation. And I said, well, how about, would you like to have lunch tomorrow? This is Thursday. How about, is it possible for you to give me lunch tomorrow on Friday? Right here? Right in that, we'll sit right in that booth right there. Right next to where we're standing, which happened to be open. So he said, yeah, Jimmy. He said, come on, let's sit down and talk right now. I said, fine. So we sat down at that booth, whatever it was, number 34. Yeah, I used to know the table numbers everywhere. So we sat down in booth, whatever, and he started telling me about what he's doing and currently doing. Remember, he's the largest income property owner in the United States of America. It's a pretty big country. A lot of big cities, a lot of wealthy guys that have a lot of income property. But no one had more income property than Edward J. DeBarlo. Yes. So I met him when he was like 76 years old, maybe 75. Yeah. I was invited to his 77th birthday. When the ICSC meets in May, the first couple of weeks in May, ICSC is the International Council of Shopping Centers. Well, guess who owned more shopping centers than anyone else in the United States? You've named it, Edward J. DeBarlo. Yeah. Anyway, so I had a wonderful time with Mr. DeBarlo. I couldn't wait to meet up with him again. It was the most stimulating kind of a meeting you could ever have with somebody. We hit it off really nicely, and I was like all ears on his, income property operations. And so, yeah, what is known as, caught a whale. That's a whale client. One that is so big, it's just about bigger than your bank. I forget what the net worth was of Mr. D at the time. It was huge. Maybe as I'm talking, I'll think of it. But I remember his net income was like $20 million a month or more. It was in the 20 millions a month range, that's net income. Ouch. That's a lot of cash. 20 million a month? Where do you put all that money? Yeah, he puts it all over the place. So I don't remember asking for a depository relationship. When we funded his draws, we funded them into an account or accounts that he opened at Southeast Bank. So the $40 million was funded in Southeast Bank accounts. Yeah, I don't know if he put any other money in there, but I know he had. When you take $40 million and you divide it by 12 months, you're going to fund it 12 or 13 months. That's 4 times 12 is 48. It's $3 or $4 million a month you put into his checking account, and then he writes checks, to pay bills with this renovation loan. Yeah. It was like a 4-year, what I call a standing loan. So it had a interest-only period of 18 months, I believe. And then it would, instead of floating over prime, it would float over something else. We picked a index that he liked. It was probably like LIBOR or something. Something exotic. So, maybe it's 200 basis points over LIBOR. Maybe that's what it changed to, adjusted quarterly. Something like that. Whereas the construction loan, the interim loan, the first 18 months of the loan, would float over prime, and it would change, date of change. So when the prime changed, the interest rate on the construction period of the loan would vary. So it would go up and down with prime. And then, prime was like 10. It's like a big number. Maybe 9 or 10. Oh, God. Prime plus 1 is like 11. Who ever heard of such a thing? Yeah, well, the single-family rates, remember, was 14%. I thought I was the luckiest guy in the world. I had a 60% of 14% loan, which is like 8.6, if I remember right. Our mortgage rate was 8.6, and I thought I died and went to heaven. Oh my God, what a big mortgage payment. But back then, you only needed, 100, maybe 120,000 hours loan, something like that. Buy a $180,000 house. Yeah. We had like 30 or 40,000 in equity in the house that Southeast Bank bought from us. How about that? They had a division. It was a Merrill Lynch executive portfolio kind of a thing where they would buy your house. And then when you got to your new market, because we moved from Miami to Tampa, which is like a 300-mile move, not a huge deal. And they, moved us, they packed us, they unpacked us, I mean, it was, the, they called it the Merrill Lynch Relocation Inc. thing, and when an executive would be hired into Southeast Bank, they had this Merrill Lynch executive relocation plan. And they would buy your house where you lived, and then they'd put a loan on the house that you're going to buy in the next market, and they'd reimburse you for the real estate commissions on both ends of the deal. So you had no real estate fee. So that was, like another 12% in equity that we picked up. Because, those brokers, they get like 6% when they sell your place. In Tampa, it was like 7%. So it was 13% worth of equity I picked up because there was no real estate fee. So that was like a windfall. Non-taxable income, because it was essentially added to the equity in the place that we bought and added to the equity in the place that we sold, because we ended up with a bigger check, because that 6% fee was retained. Well, not retained. I mean, they paid the broker, and then they reimbursed me for the payment that they made for the broker. So, in a sense, Merrill Lynch, well, they reimbursed the real estate fee that we suffered and that we experienced. So we didn't suffer. If you had a place worth $200,000 in Miami, and they sold it for $200,000, you got $200,000. Yeah, it wasn't $200,000 less the brokerage fee, because the brokerage fee was paid by Merrill Lynch. Yeah. So that was kind of a windfall. And then when we bought the house in Tampa, there was no real estate fee. So we picked up another 7% of equity, on the buyer side when we bought some place in Tampa, which we bought a place in Carrollwood Village. A nice, young, growing community about 11 miles north of the city center of Tampa. Yeah, I love Tampa. It was a very exciting city. And when you go in there in a very high level at a bank, and I was at the highest level that a real estate lender could be in the system. They had 5 regions. So I was the senior executive lender for Region 2, which is the second largest region in the state of Florida, which was Hillsborough County, which is where the city center of Tampa is, and the 17 surrounding counties. So it was a pretty big piece of real estate that I was in charge of, making loans to developers that were in the 17 counties or where the property was in the 17 counties. And of course, since Tampa was alive and well and growing like crazy, all the major players were in Tampa. All the major Texas players, all the major Florida players, they were all playing in the Florida sun. And Jimmy was out there bouncing around with some of the other major players in the market. And I got more than my fair share of the lending activity in that market. Yeah. I had some, God. I mean, Costain of Canada. It was one of the largest developers in the country. And I had Costain. I got Mr. DeBarlo. So DeBarlo Enterprises, or whatever he called his, whatever. Important thing is I had Edward DeBarlo's 100% personal guarantee for financial performance and completion performance. I had his 100% guarantee of completion. That adds another little dimension to, a developer's responsibility, because you not only have to borrow the money, you got to build whatever you're supposed to be building. Yeah. So he guaranteed he would actually renovate the shopping center. You don't want to get to the last draw and the developer disappears and it never really gets kind of finished. Yeah, that's what a completion guarantee helps assure, financial performance and the performance of the actual work to be done. Yeah. So that was good. I got that with every borrower. Yeah. Even some of these fancy Texas borrowers. They were used to some of these crazy Texas loans. Boy, that was the wild, wild west. I said, hold on, boys. You're over here on the East Coast of the United States. We don't quite fly quite as crazy as the good folks in Dallas, Texas, do. Yeah. I mean, you guys are running around with guns strapped to your hips. We don't walk around here with guns strapped to our hips. As a matter of fact, it's not even legal for that. You're allowed to have a gun, but you couldn't strap it to your hip, I don't think. And if you put it in your pocket, then it was a concealed weapon, and you had to have a special permit for that. Yeah. Which I had a concealed weapons permit, because as a very senior banker, if I was going to work in the bank late, I carried some heat. Yes, sirree, Bob, in my pocket, I had something that would go boom. Yep. In my coat pocket. And I'd put my hand on that little devil, and I'd aim it right at whoever needed to be aimed at. And it would cost me a jacket because I'd blow a hole in the jacket. But I learned how to shoot from the hip, literally. Yep. When I went into the shooting range, I stepped aside of that bar level thing where you have your ammunition and your clips, because I want to learn how to aim and shoot from the hip. And it takes a little extra training to get experienced on how to bend your wrist so you just shoot right. Instead of having to draw the gun out of your pocket, you just turn your hand and fire when ready. And if you didn't take your hand out of your pocket, whoever was giving you trouble wouldn't imagine you shooting it within your pocket. Yeah, I never had to fire it, but I tell you what, I certainly felt more comfortable having that little 5-shot 38 special in my pocket. Yeah, it's called the Chief Special, made by, I think, Smith & Wesson. Model 36, I think, something like that. Little 2-inch barrel, or 1 7/8-inch barrel, a revolver. So you didn't have to worry about, like a semi-automatic. You got to pull back the slide and all that. With a revolver, you just pull the trigger, and it goes boom. And it was a Chief Special. So instead of it being a 6-shot with a larger cylinder, it was a 5-shot. Yeah. And you could shoot, I believe, 357 Magnums in that. It was chambered for both. Woo! Now that will give you that's a lot of power coming out of a little pistol. But you want to make a lot of noise. I'd rather not hit the victim or the person. I just want to have them see the flame coming through my jacket. Because it would be a flamethrower. Woo! Yes, sir, Bob. When you shoot through your pocket. It's a surprise to the other party. It wouldn't be a surprise to Jimmy because I practiced shooting from the hip. Yep. And there were some outdoor ranges we went to in way west in Dade County. To like a big rock quarry, where you could shoot and there wasn't anybody for 10 miles. And your bullets don't travel 10 miles, even if you miss the mountain of dirt that's in front of you. I tell you what, Marilyn was a good shot. Woo, boy. She'd aim and shoot that sucker, and she'd knock down the cans off the log. You'd set up cans, that are shot at, soda cans. There were hundreds of them laying around all over the place. So after your party, 3 or 4 people or 2 people, you'd have a big tree stump that's laying over, and you set the the cans up on the tree stump. Yeah. Any way you can, the best way you can. It wasn't an actual commercial range where they had range managers and you pay a fee of some kind. No, this is just you're out there out in the middle of nowhere and you shoot your gun because you wanted to practice shooting your gun. And there was no one around. There was an old Volkswagen, an old dead Volkswagen that was out of, in the wilderness there. And we shot at that often, Yeah. But, shooting cans gives you a little more reward because when you hit the can, it knocks it off the tree stump. Yeah. Whereas just shooting at, a dead Volkswagen just puts another hole in the Volkswagen. Yeah. I mean, it looked like Swiss cheese. It was unimaginable you could put another hole in it. But, yeah, it was still standing when we were shooting at it. It's probably a shopping center now. As these communities grow westward, from the east coast of Florida, you have to grow westward, obviously, because the Atlantic Ocean is eastward. And I guarantee you the coastline of Florida is full of all kinds of commercial product and super expensive residential product. Like Mar-a-Lago, for example. Trump bought that for like $9 million, I believe, from the state of Florida in an auction. The state of Florida had an auction because the C.W. Post estate bequeathed it to the state of Florida. And the state of Florida said, "Oh my God, how nice. What a wonderful gift of $10 million, $14 million property." You know, until Florida spent a couple of years and a couple $1 million in doing the landscaping. When you got a 40-acre estate that goes from the intercoastal to the Atlantic Ocean on the island of Palm Beach, the whole southern tip of the island of Palm Beach was owned by the C.W. Post estate, and they built a huge castle kind of property. You know, gold inlaid, everything. Oh my God. And the state of Florida said, "You know what? I can't afford this free property anymore. We need to get rid of it." So they auctioned it, believe it or not. And the bid starts at $5 million. Let me hear $5 million. $5 million. You know. And and guess who was one of the bidders? Yes, Donald J. Trump. Yep, he was one of the bidders. He was the successful bidder at $9 million in round numbers. And he spent $1 million or so, you know, fixing it up and securing it. Because over the 2 or 3 years that the state of Florida owned it, you know, they didn't do a tip-top job they just did what minimal they had to do to keep the property from degrading. Now that's a lot different than if you paid $9 million for something and you want to make sure it looks super duper fragilistic, and you're a billionaire already, and this would be your winter residence. And that's what that's what Donald J. Trump did. He bought it from the state of Florida at an auction 20 years ago, in round numbers, and then spent $1.5 million or $2 million getting it up to speed, cleaning some of the higher parts of the walls. You know, you might have some rooms that had, 30-foot ceilings. So, gold inlaid, all kinds of stuff. Chandeliers made of genuine crystal, And the rooms were big, so the chandeliers were huge. So that's what he did. He bought it for $9 million, spent a couple of million fixing it up. It was a fixer-upper. But it was, oh boy, it was a castle inside and out. Yep. Today, it's an unimaginable value. It could be 300 million. It could be $500 million. You just put a number on it. It's hard to, I guess you could figure out how many acres. It's like, I think, over 40 acres. Now, on the island of Palm Beach, a builder's quarter acre was no house on it. Like $5 million if you want just a lot. There's a couple, on the island of Palm Beach, and I mean maybe 2 or 3, maybe 1, maybe none at this point. A house, is 15, 20, 30 million on a builder quarter acre lot. Okay? Yeah, it's definitely $20 million neighborhood. 20 million a copy. So now, how do you extrapolate a builder quarter acre lot worth $5 million? How do you extrapolate that to 40 acres? I mean, the land has to be worth $50 million, you know, because in theory you could knock the building down, which would be a terrible, heinous crime. Maybe you keep it as a clubhouse and build the remaining 20 acres, I think, of excess land you got there, and surround that center structure with houses on half-acre lots. Let's say half acre instead of quarter acre. So you got bigger lots. They're worth $7 million a piece. Maybe you could squeeze out 50 lots, you know, out of that 20 acres. Yeah, 20 acres should be it. That's 40 or 50 houses, figuring a half acre per house. That includes streets, by the way. That's why they call it a builder half acre instead of a half acre. Because you don't really get a half acre. You get a half acre all the way to the center line of the street in front of you. Yeah. So you draw your rectangle right to the center line of the street in front of you. And then, of course, from the edge of the swale of the road to the center line, that property is deeded over to the municipality that's going to own the streets, you know, which would be the island of Palm Beach. They'd own the streets, you'd own the rest of your builder half acre, which means you probably got a third of an acre of net property. Yeah. So when you buy a builder half acre, you're only getting a third acre in round numbers, depending on the curve and are you on a cul-de-sac or not, all that kind of diddly dudes. So out of 20 acres, you get 40 lots. Yep. And then you got streets, water, sewer, and all that, which takes up part of that 20 acres. Because remember, 20 acres is that whole estate thing. And then the other 20 acres is you could build houses all around there. And build in streets, water, sewer, and all that. And sell 40 lots next to the castle. I mean, that's a theory that it could be done. Which, you know, the net income from all that would pay off whatever you had to invested, you know, in the entirety of the property, including, you know, the entire C.W. Post estate. In which case Trump would have had, you know, maybe 11 million, you know, in the deal at that point. Let's just say 12 million, round up. So when you're selling lots, it's 7 or 8 million a piece, and you got 40 of them. That gives you 32 million worth of gross income, and that 32 million can surely pay you back the 11 million you had to pay to buy the entirety of the whole estate, and you got 20 million left over in your pocket as excess cash over cost. Yeah, that'd be like that's a hell of a footnote in your financial statement, right? Yeah. But he didn't do that. Donald J. Trump is a classy guy, and he's already worth $5 billion. So now he's worth almost $6 billion, having the C.W. Post estate in there, right? You know, that whole estate property has got to be $500 million. So if he's worth $5.5 billion, now he's worth $6 billion. You know, I mean, money begets money, as my mother used to tell me. Those with money can make incredible amounts of money if you have money. It's not easy to make a lot of money when you don't have money. It's it's that simple with a capitalistic society. Now, in a socialistic society, everybody's got the same, basically nothing, in the class of people, that are the wealthy. That's one class. So you got a two-class system. You got the super wealthy, and then you got everybody else that has nothing in socialism. That's about how that works. So if you're part of the aristocracy, and you're born into the aristocracy, so to speak, then, you're aristocrats. You're wealthy people. But in America, in the United States, you're in the land of the free. And in a capitalistic society, everybody can make whatever the hell they want to make. It's all a matter of, if you play your cards right, and you don't get unlucky. Yeah. So that's the little tiny world of Donald J. Trump acquiring the CW Post estate. And this judge down in New York City, who's a kangaroo court system that prosecuting, Trump for fraud because he was overstating the values of his properties. He said, Mar-a-Lago's not worth more than $18 million. What? The swimming pool is worth $18 million. What the hell are you talking about? Jeez. The property, if you bulldozed it, is probably worth, well, remember the 20-acre story I told you build houses? So let's say you build 30 acres worth of houses, build or half acre. That means you sell 60 houses, 60 lots. 60 lots, let's just say $7 million a lot. That's $42 million. Land value if you bulldoze everything. And you just subdivide it into 60 lots. That's a reasonable expectation for a 40-acre piece of property where you're going to develop it into 60 builder half acres, which mean the actual property owner gets like third-acre lots. And the difference between a half acre and what you have, that third acre, that's 1/6 of your property is basically easement for the streets and the water and the sewer lines and everything that service your property, which the developer has to install. So that might cost, $50,000 a house. So you multiply 50,000 times 60. So what do you got? $3 or $4 million to develop the property with streets, water, and sewer. Can't cost more than, can't cost more than that. I financed a lot of stuff. And those kind of numbers are, the kind of numbers you do when you're in a bar room trying to make sense of whether this deal makes sense or not. That's how the math would be. Yep. Amazing as it is. The story of Mar-a-Lago. Yep. That's why my mother said that people with money can make money. Oodles of it. Yep. The have-nots and the haves. Here we are, December 31, celebrating the last day of the year. And, people are going to go to New Year's Eve parties all over. We're probably going to walk out to the balcony and see, people cheering in the streets from 8 stories above in our balcony. And then when you got to go pee-pee, you can just go to the bathroom when you feel like it. When you stand in the middle of that zone of people that are wanting to see the ball drop from the street level of Manhattan, they corral you in this zone of spectators that could house 1 million people. And guess what? There are no portalettes anywhere. There's no in and out. You can't go through the barrier to go to the bathroom in one of the local restaurants. No, can you imagine what that restaurant bathroom would look like? Trying to serve, 20,000 people that essentially you're going to line up outside your restaurant to go to the bathroom. No. You have to wear adult diapers. So in the case you got to go, you're going to go, in your pants, as they say. Ooh, you need to prepare for that several days in advance. Because if you got to do number 2 and you got no place to do it, the last place you want to do it is in your pants. Can you imagine what that place smells like? Ooh! I guess later in the evening it could get a little bit ripe. Phew. Because with 1 million people that they project, which let's just say they over-projected. So let's say it's 600,000 people. Now, sooner or later, you got to open the gates so everyone can go home. And go to the bathroom real fast somewhere. 600,000 people all of a sudden being released from this corral that they got in the middle of a couple of wide streets in Manhattan so you could see the ball drop. That would be a problem. We're supposed to have a full moon, okay? Around I think Marilyn said the 14th or the 20th, that third week in January. And almost all the planets are lined up with the moon and the sun. Now, what I remember about geology and geography, which I can write a book, but I don't know about that topic, as I grew up as a scientist. Yeah, this whole thing with geology and geography and social studies, political science, that was for those people. Yeah, when all these people are learning how to write poems. No, that was not Jimmy. I was, let's take apart the clock and see if we can put it back together again. Yeah, that was what Jimmy's challenges were. Or let's dissect this TV that my parents just decided to get another TV, and this one will go out for the trash. Well, I would rescue it from the trash, and I'd bring it downstairs where I had a little workbench I put together, or my father gave me. Probably a workbench that he built a real big one in the basement of this house we lived in on the North Shore of Long Island. And we created this big, or my father created this big basement downstairs. So it was almost like a 2-story house, but one level was subterranean. And we're talking finished off in knotty pine, and really finished off to a very high degree. Yeah. And he built a 10-seat bar, I think straight bar. With an open end for the service people to, it was when they had parties downstairs. They were big parties, 40, 50 people, so I served as the waiter, the bartender when I was like 12 or 13. I would bartend the parties. Yeah, make a little money, Those people, there was a tip jar, and they'd leave tips for the 12-year-old. So I could go buy toys. Yeah, well, I would buy test equipment. I wasn't buying toys. I wanted an oscilloscope so I could measure frequencies inside this broken down TV that I resurrected. And I made an oscilloscope out of the TV. How about that? So instead of the electronic beam sweeping the entire screen, I had a smaller beam that was scattered across the middle of the TV. Yeah. And it would pulsate with I measured our pulse, but I didn't have a preamp strong enough to amplify the pulse back in those days. Today that'd be an easy matter. So here we are, New Year's Eve. It's 10:41 a.m. As we can see by our clock right here. You can't see the 10. You can just see 0:41 and the seconds counting. Well, it's 10:41 because I can bend my head around and see the clock. And it says 10. And this one down here, you can't see it. Move this thing out of the way. You see, there's a clock right there. It says 10:41. If I turn down the brightness. Yeah, there we go. I was on high beam with the lights. I thought I was getting a sunburn. Yeah. Epidemic is still playing. It's a 3-hour royalty-free instrumental, I guess you would call it. They call it Epidemic, royalty-free instrumental, which permits me to use it, in a sense, as I see fit, as long as it, I don't disparage, the soundtrack, bad-mouthing it, or jeez. So, I just saw a little thing passing through my iPhone that happens to be sensitive to certain notifications, which I get. And Trump has a $112,000 charge because of the exorbitant rate that the New York State is assessing him for this litigation that is stalled because he's now president, and the state of New York can't sentence a sitting president. So in theory, he'd have to wait, the state would have to wait 4 years, to collect on the bond that they got for this exorbitant penalty. With the interest charges, $100,000 a week or some crazy number. So for the principal and the interest of the bond for this litigation that is now stalled because Trump actually got elected, now what do we do? And if the state of New York doesn't discharge that in appeal, then I'm afraid the Supreme Court is going to have to step in and say, hey, look, the President of the United States cannot be prosecuted. We see a number of, I don't know if they would do this. See, they'd probably wait for the appeals court to do something. And the appeals court would probably overturn the conviction. And then it's over. And then with the overturning of the conviction, then there would have to be some dismantling of that bond, that crazy, exorbitant, illegal bond. It was designed, to collect maybe, $300 or $400 from somebody, not to make a $380,000 bond where there's a huge interest charge on top of that. That has to be, canceled. And the money that was put up for the bond returned to the principals, which would be Trump and the bonding company. Yeah. So that's going to have to get unraveled. So he's got a team of lawyers working on that. It's not something there's an everyday workload, because everything is done with that trial that was, it was like leading the witness. There was no way that you could not convict. It was, the defendants weren't allowed to show evidence, on the other side of the story, so to speak. We have an adversarial system, so you have two sides to every trial, to every side of a settlement, and they should have settled this with some kind of a fine, but they bootstrapped it together so it used part of a federal law and part of a state law. Well, the state court can't use part of a federal law to prosecute a defendant. You can't, that's not allowed in our system. That's what you call, it's not allowed. And that's what superior courts deal with, and Supreme Courts. The issues become so large that it couldn't be equitably solved in the lower courts. So the Supreme Court just says, poof, the Superior Court has overturned the conviction, and this is what's going to happen with that bond. And they would just have a directive order of some sort to compel the state officials to behave in a certain way. Because the state officials, in this very unusual case where you're prosecuting, someone who's running for office, for God's sakes. He's campaigning for president, and at the same time he's being prosecuted by the state of New York through a crazy district attorney. And they're going to have to do something with that. That can't sit. Now, the judge hasn't sentenced Trump. So, in a sense, he could dismiss the whole thing. And if he sits down with enough legal scholars, particularly to show how this conviction is going to be overturned at the appellate level. Now, if Judge Mushan in Manhattan can be convinced that this conviction isn't going to stand anyway, but because of prosecutorial error, there's a number of ways this case can be overturned. Speaking as a non-lawyer, which I am a non-lawyer. I didn't want anyone to think I'm a lawyer using all these big words. But anyway, that's why appellate courts and so forth deal with this stuff. Because sometimes, laws that are written for the common man don't necessarily work, for the President of the United States, which is like he's like a king for 4 years. He's, because that's almost precisely what happens with a President of the United States. He's surrounded by guards. He can have gates and walls. It can be constructed any way he wants, so to speak, within reason times 10. So he's now he's already a celebrity, and he's already a multi-billionaire. The question is how many billions, The minimal is $4 billion with all those properties, golf course properties. 11 of them around the world and the United States. And they're world-class properties. There's not a piece of dust laying around. Everything gets totally touched up. Someone drops a hanky somewhere. There's some guy with a little sweepy tool that picks it up. Because there are people wandering around his golf course properties and his estate properties. They have staffs that do things like maintenance and cleaning and, supervisors that watch over all that. And if you've ever been to a Trump property, they are spotless. They're exquisite real estate properties. Yeah. I played on the golf course in Miami. I don't know if I played on the golf course in Palm Beach. I think I must have. But I played on world-class properties, and they are truly spectacular. The landscaping is to the blade of grass. If there's a blade of grass that got missed by a weed whacker or whatever tool is used to trim the edges of a grass or grassy anywhere, and there's a blade of grass that didn't get it, someone will be down there with a pair of scissors snipping that blade of grass. Yeah. That's how trimmed and exquisite these properties are. There is not a blade of grass that is out of place or not trimmed properly by accident or by, the error of a maintenance person. Because they're in charge to make sure the grounds are kept properly. Just like with aristocracies. So there comes a point where you become so wealthy that you become super wealthy. And if you're worth $5 or $10 billion, you're super wealthy. He has his own $100 million aircraft, that's trimmed out to the exquisiteness of what a king or a queen or a king, like Donald Trump, he has his own kingdom, so to speak, constructed within the rules and laws of the United States. And when he flies from one place to the other, he has his own $100 million jet. 100 million. Which is all trimmed out in supple beige leather. Every seating, every cushion, carpeted to the extent, soundproofed, so that the flight on a 757 that has been converted in the most tactful way for a multi-billionaire. Yep. It was owned by some rock star or something, and he bought it because a 757 wasn't big enough for said rock star, or said rock star fell off the top 20 musicians, or whatever. Some of these planes get bought and sold. But a 757, is an aircraft that's probably less than 10 years old from the date of manufacture. Boeing 757. A very safe aircraft. All the scientific improvements and telemetry and so forth. You can be sure the avionics, that would be the word you would use, the avionics package that covers all the in-flight instrumentation, radar, you name it, physical ground radar, cloud radar, airstream radar, if you want to look at the airstreams, the different layers of air. When you're flying a big, valuable aircraft like that, you get the best radar money can buy. And that includes devices that can actually see the different airstreams and whether they're conflicting with one another, which may create severe updrafts, downdrafts, anything that would make it uncomfortable for the protected property that's in the back of your airplane. And at this point, Trump, ever since the election, and actually within a month or two of the election, he became a protected property, a protected personage, him and his family, requiring Secret Service protection, which is a pretty when I say Secret Service, we're talking, like SEAL Team 6 type people, that are in this protective detail that is required by the United States government when you've been elected president of the United States. And it's not been very frequent. It's only, I guess maybe, it's only, I can't actually say, but I think in at least the last 100 years, many of our presidents have been 8-year, terminal, what do they call it? You can only run for 2 terms. Term limited. Yeah. That kind of a vocabulary word. So there are only several times that the president actually was not reelected. In the not reelected category, you've got Bush 41, the father of George Herbert Walker Bush, President 43. So you got 41 and 43. Well, his father, Bush 41, did not get reelected. He served a 4-year term and was not reelected. And you've got Jimmy Carter, that's number 2. He was not reelected. He only served 4 years as president. The peanut farmer from Georgia. Yeah. And now you've got Biden, single-term president, because Trump was reelected. So now you got Trump 45 and Trump 47. Because he'll become the 47th president after the 46th president. All right? And right now you got Speaker Johnson. They're running around like crazy. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. And everybody in Congress is flopping around Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana. And he's the Speaker of the House. And he needs to get reelected. So the Democrats will probably disappear and vote no, or vote present, or vote yes, or not vote at all. You don't have to vote. You can go home, and then instead of having 435 members, you'd have 434 members. And, there are all kinds of ways he could get elected Speaker of the House. Is all the Republicans vote together except for one jerk. And he gets elected with 218 votes for, and 213 votes against. Once, Mike Johnson gets 218 votes, it doesn't really matter how the Democrats vote. If they don't vote, then he would just be presumed of winning more than 50% plus 1. He could end up with 55% of the vote because everybody didn't show up to vote, on the Democratic side. So that intrigue will stretch on through the day and hopefully end with, today's vote. I don't know how long how long the vote is held open. I know they're going to hold a vote today, and people, so it all comes down to the last minute, as usual. And all the talking heads will give us their version of what we might call the palace intrigue. Yeah. Republican from Kentucky, Massey, says he will not vote for Johnson. Period. Now, he either changed his mind or everyone else votes yes, and it's the matter is done. Trump has given his full and unconditional endorsement of Speaker Johnson, as he should, because Speaker Johnson is likely going to be the Speaker of the House. That's going to carry the electoral votes, to the Congress on the 3rd of January, which is, come on, guys, that's 4 days away. Next week, on a Tuesday, I guess. He's going to be carrying the votes that were cast all over the country, the electoral votes. Yeah. The electoral votes. The 312 electoral votes that Trump won. And he won the popular vote in the state of Florida. So all the electoral votes from the state of Florida get cast for Donald John Trump. Yeah. All 29 of them, I think. They're 29. You don't split them up into little pieces. He gets 100%. And that's how the Electoral College works. Each state on November 5th held an election for president. And if your state, the state of confusion, the state of New Jersey, if it voted, 50-50 vote, and Trump got one more vote than represents 50% of the people who voted, Trump would get 100% all of the electoral votes for New Jersey, just like Trump won Florida and South Carolina and Louisiana and North Carolina and Georgia and Pennsylvania. All the swing states voted for Trump in fairly decent numbers. And if you added up all the votes that Trump won over just the number of votes that were over Biden's votes, it was about 750,000 votes. Now, we've had two elections, like in 2020, there was like 40,000 votes in about 4 or 5 states. Made the difference. I'm talking about 40,000 popular votes. Because you remember, it's state by state. Well, if you add up the swing state volume of voters that was over 50%, over, the other candidate, let's put it that way, it was about 750,000 votes. The last election cycle, it was like 50,000 votes or less. And the election cycle before that, which is when Trump was first elected, Trump 45, he won by like 110,000 votes over, in all the swing states. Yeah, that's that's amazing. So, not only did Trump win the swing states by over 750,000 votes, which is, more than enough. It only takes 40 or 50,000, and he got 750,000. So the swing state was, seriously in his favor. And the polls called it a toss-up state. It was in the toss-up column. Well, it got tossed up all right, and Trump caught the ball. Yeah. Well, all those electoral votes get carried into Congress for official recordation in the records of Congress on the 3rd of January, which is, since this is the last day of December, you only got 3 more days after that, so it adds up to 4 days, babes. But the Speaker of the House is the Speaker of the new House. The Speaker of the House as it's comprised as of this November's election. That Speaker of the House, which should be the same as the former Speaker of the House, should be Mike Johnson. And that vote is being collected today. I don't know if the voting opened today, but it'll open this afternoon, if not already open. And I don't know how long you can hold open, a vote. Whether it's an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever kind of limits. I guess whatever Congress decides. But it will be some finite number of hours in Friday. Yeah. And I don't think they've started the vote yet, because I think I'd see a vote count meter on my delayed broadcast over here in the corner pocket. Yeah. And then on the 6th of January, Trump would be formally president-elect. Right now he's president-elect, but they haven't, they've got the states, and they've all reported the findings of the election. And the states are currently certifying fulfilling their statutory requirements and certifying the elections. I think Florida's already certified the election. And those certification documents go to, not only are they retained in the records of the state of Florida, but the certification is handed over to the Speaker of the House through, certain congressional agencies that, look at the certification, and the Department of Justice, make sure the certification is, does in fact certify the election, and he does get all 29 electoral votes, which, the Secretary of State of every state legislature certifies, and he gets 29 electoral votes. And there's a certification for that, and it's signed, and, in triplicate or more. But that certification goes to Congress through the Speaker of the House. Well, you have to have a Speaker of the House so that he can deliver these records to Congress because they're collected for every state. Yep, that's what happens. And if he doesn't get certified, if the Speaker of the House does not get, meaning the current one, Mike Johnson, if he doesn't get elected, then he can't carry the certifications into Congress, fulfilling his congressional responsibility pursuant to the Constitution of the United States. And then on the 6th, all those electoral votes get computed and received with the certification from the Speaker of the House into the Senate. And the Senate then is the one that receives, the 312 electoral votes with all the certifications and all the documentation embodied in a neat little canister. And it gets literally carried over to the Senate. And then the Senate has official action to essentially declare Donald John Trump as the 57th president-elect. Hello? Am I okay with that? Why wouldn't I be? You mean? Oh, to have it delivered today?